Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong, and I want to thank our underwriter, audiobooks.com, for sponsoring the program. This week we have a great program for you, something that I didn't know about until a couple of months ago, that I learned of the Lonesome Dove collection at Texas State University. And today we're going to talk to the curator of that collection and more, Steve Davis. He's on the phone now. Steve, how are you today?
Doing great, Bill. Good to talk to you.
Great to have you. Now, you do more than curate the Lonesome Dove collection. You have a bigger empire than that, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Wittliff Collections is really focused on collecting the best of Texas and southwestern culture. So we have a number of great archives and really a lot of treasures, ranging from one of the rare 1555 editions of Cabeza de Vaca's book. Cabeza de Vaca, was the first European to arrive in Texas in 1528.
So you have the original book?
We have one of the 1555 editions, which is one of the rarest books in the world. There are probably about somewhere around 20 in all. So we have one of those. We have a little songbook that Willie Nelson made when he was about 11 years old, a little handwritten songbook. And, a number of great photographs from Texas, the Southwest, Mexico. We have literary archives like for Cormac McCarthy, people like that. And of course, as you mentioned, the Lonesome Dove collection.
Now, Bill Wittliff wrote the screenplay for Lonesome Dove. I just want to cover that in case, there's people who don't know that. McMurtry wrote the book, but Bill Wittliff wrote the screenplay. He also wrote the screenplay for what else?
Bill, he's part of that whole renaissance in Austin in the early 1970s that came together with the music and the filmmaking and a lot of great writers moving to the city. And Bill came out of this kind of tradition where he could have gone to Hollywood and become a successful screenwriter, but he really wanted to remain rooted in Texas because he knew he would have an authentic vision in Texas, and that would get corrupted if he lived out in L.A. So he
I like that.
Really, from the beginning, focused heavily on writing the stories that he knew about, in his heart and in his soul and in his bones. And so his very first film that he wrote actually was Barbarossa, starring Willie Nelson. It was based on an old folk tale that he had heard growing up from his grandfather. And from there, Bill went on and did all kinds of things. He's best known for Lonesome Dove, but he's also written Legends of the Fall.
Another great film.
The Cowboy Way, Perfect Storm.
Yeah, Perfect Storm.
Any number of things. The most recent one, of course, you may know of from being down in the valley, A Night in Old Mexico, starring Robert Duvall, which is filmed primarily in Brownsville.
Yes, that was fun to watch because a lot of what is on the film as Mexico is really Brownsville. It's easier to film in Brownsville than Mexico these days, no doubt.
Yep.
But it looks authentic, and for anybody from any place else would say that looks just like Mexico.
Yes.
So, I think, for me, when I discovered that someone just told me the Lonesome Dove collection is in San Marcos at Texas State University, and I was surprised because I didn't know that such a thing existed. So you don't know, you not only have the script and all that, but you have artifacts from the movie, right?
Absolutely. And you're right to be surprised because film archives are very difficult to put together and to collect and maintain because, generally places like the Wittliff, we collect the work of artists. So, most writers of consequence, grow up from the time they were small children believing that every word they put down on paper will be completely precious and want to be preserved and seen by future generations. So you have somebody collecting their own material, their own archive from the beginning. But films are very different because they are really these giant kind of traveling circuses where you have 100 different or more professionals come in for 6 weeks, or some of them maybe just a couple of days, and cooperate on this venture. And when it's all done, it disbands and everybody goes on to the next show. And so to put together a film archive is very difficult. We were really lucky, and really Lonesome Dove and the people who love it are really lucky because Bill Wittliff, in addition to being the screenwriter, was also the co-executive producer of the film. And Bill, as a great collector himself, he was the founder of these collections.
How did he come? Did he go to school there?
No, well, I think he went here for a semester, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, I'll just tell you the story.
Okay, tell me.
The best version I can.
Okay.
Which is that, Bill's alumnus of the University of Texas up the road, and UT has a world-renowned archival repository, the Ransom Research Center, which collects, works by British playwrights, and they just recently acquired the Gabriel Garcia Marquez papers.
Really? Wow.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And because UT is sort of oriented towards world culture, it's never particularly been that interested in its own culture of this place, of Texas and the Southwest.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a long tradition of people, going back to folks like Americo Paredes, or even before him to J. Frank Dobie, really looking to collect and preserve and interpret the culture of the place where we live. The whole spirit of place and the idea that you become a better citizen by learning about the place where you live. And so my understanding is that when Bill acquired really the elements of this collection, which was a great cache of J. Frank Dobie materials that Dobie had not turned over to UT during his lifetime, Bill originally approached the folks at the Ransom Center, and they were not particularly interested in that material. And so then he came to visit here at Texas State, where he had been treated warmly before when he had come on visits as a screenwriter to speak to classes and so forth.
Yeah.
And this is, when I was a student here, and, I came here because it was a fun place to go to school in those years. And the university was really trying, at that time, we had a very visionary president who saw a real need for Texas, well, then Southwest Texas, to begin transforming into a major university and to become really serious to meet the needs of the growing and changing population. And so establishing this really world-class collection on campus was a no-brainer for them. And that was about almost 30 years ago. And it's just kind of grown and flourished ever since.
So the Lonesome Dove collection started there 30 years ago?
Well, this collection started with Bill and Sally Wittliff's gift of J. Frank Dobie papers.
Magnificent.
And soon after this collection was started in 1986, Bill began working on Lonesome Dove, on the film, which I believe premiered in February 1989. And so the entire time he was working on the film, he had this collection at the back of his mind, of course. And so the sorts of things that usually disappear, the props, the costumes, and the location scout photos, the call sheets, all the elements that go into making a film. In addition to the screenplays and all of his drafts of the screenplays, he hung on to every piece of that and got all the actors and other producer and director and everybody else to buy into it as well.
Well, it was probably much easier at the time because no one knew that it was going to become the cultural phenomenon that it became.
Exactly. And, when you talk to Bill, I don't know if you got a chance to discuss this, but of course the Western was completely dead at that time.
He said there was nothing deader than the miniseries except the Western.
Yes. But, it's easy to say that, but, I think at the time, even then, McMurtry's novel won the Pulitzer Prize. You had incredible actors like Robert Duvall, who, he was not doing television at the time. He signed on. And Tommy Lee Jones, who everybody already knew was a great actor. So, I think there probably were a few expectations for that miniseries.
Well, he said that he knew, when I talked to Wittliff, he said we knew that we were getting some magnificent scenes on film. We didn't know that it would, transcend into this even international phenomenon that's loved around the world. And, even in Argentina, you can go to ranches, as Duvall once said. He's been to ranches in Argentina where they've worn out copies of Lonesome Dove on DVD. So, well, do you have Gus's hat?
We do have Gus's hat.
How cool. And have you worn it?
As a respectable curator, I do not wear the hats from our collection here. No, we don't quite do that.
So what is it that, you have a lot of people come through there naturally, so what surprises people?
Well, I think that And let me back up just a bit to talk about really the evolution of our presentation of Lonesome Dove.
Okay.
When this collection began, it was basically one large room holding stuff, and we had a couple of front display cases, which we changed out regularly. And I began here in 1994, and at that time we put up some of these Lonesome Dove things, and suddenly this quiet little corner of the library, would really become very active with visitors. And as the years went on, we decided, we should make this a permanent exhibit in these two front lobby cases. And then several years ago, the university decided, let's dedicate an entire room to displaying the Lonesome Dove collection. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we are now. And so it kind of functions like a shrine for people when they come here. And we see generations, families who watch the film together every year at Thanksgiving or Christmas. We have many students who bring their parents and grandparents. We have many people named Gus or Carl.
Really? Oh, cool.
and when people come, just being able to see the stuff that was actually in the film, it really kind of jumps that divide between what's on the screen and what happened in reality, and it really kind of helps put you much closer. You really feel the human element that went into the making of the film in a way that was impossible before. Mm-hmm. To see exactly what they're wearing and how carefully those clothes were constructed, to see the blueprints for the set, or the actual gun that Robert Duvall used.
So it's sacred.
That's a good way to put it. Mm-hmm. It really is.
I mean, for many people, it would be. I have a Facebook page devoted to Texas culture. I have a lot of people, 20,000 people on it. And there's nothing more sacred to this group than Lonesome Dove. And all you have to do is throw out a line, and they can answer it. They know the dialogue. These are people who, like me, watch it once or twice a year. It's a great devotion to this work of art. Mm-hmm. And so you see them there, in your exhibition hall, and you sense that there's a kind of sacredness to it for many people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You'll see people, and these are display cases that range from slightly above eye level down to ankle level, and so you'll see people, kneeling down on the floor, peering at things to get a better look.
And you have Gus's body, right?
We do. It's terrified generations of kindergartners. When they come through on tours, they just know there's a dead body up here.
So the very body that Carl transported from Montana back to San Antonio is there.
Absolutely, and you can see that the film crew. I mean, you can see how people have a little bit of fun when they're making films too, because they did give the body an eyeball, which you can't really see when you watch it. Uh-huh. But when you're an actor, they're handling it in person. Yeah, you see that eyeball staring out at you.
Wittliff told me that there's really a longer version of Lonesome Dove. There's about an extra 30 minutes there that they didn't get to air, and I asked him if there was if we could get it, and he said no. Does it exist anywhere? This extra 30 minutes of film, does it exist?
That's a good question. What I do know is that we have about 87 hours, I believe it is, that represent all the printed takes that were made during the filming of Lonesome Dove.
Wow.
And you can have a take that doesn't get printed, and so the ones that are printed, there's something there that somebody thinks is worth putting, actually putting onto the film and hanging on to. And of course, as you know, I think the final film came down to 4.5, 5 hours, and so we have all this stuff, and we're actually currently getting it digitized.
So can you see it? I mean, if you go to the collection, can you see these, or when you digitize them, then we can see them?
Well, it's really an ongoing process, Bill, and this gets into a lot of legal issues that have to do with the unionization of the industry and the rights of the people who participated, and also the production company, which owns the rights to the film. And so you have all of these really competing, sometimes cooperative interests who actually own the copyright to that material.
But Motown owned the rights originally, right?
I know that Motown took out the option on it and helped, and Suzanne DePass from Motown, along with Bill Wittliff, was the co-executive producer. The company, I think it is Hallmark Films now that owns it. I'm not really up on all the legal stuff, but I do know, our role really is to make sure at very basic level that we're preserving this material so it just doesn't disappear, so it'll be here for future generations. And my understanding is that once we have these tapes digitized, then it'll be a matter of researchers who come here can request permission to see them and go through the legal channels to have that done. But we're not in a position right now to be able to show a lot of that. Yeah. So, I hope that can happen because that,
I would think that just from a commercial perspective, given the enormous pent-up interest there is in Lonesome Dove, that if you were to release a uncut version, so to speak, it would sell big.
Oh yeah, I feel the same way. Absolutely. But I'm a mere curator.
Yes, I understand.
University campus. So.
well, Mr. Wittliff told me that one of the issues was that what you pointed out, that even at the time when he made an argument that we should include this in the original, they said, well, we'd have to go back and get new contracts, and all the players would have to sign off, and it would be complicated. So let's just go with what we have. So I'm sure today you'd have the same problem. You'd have to, like you say, go back and get all kinds of approvals.
Yes. And, fortunately there's no approval needed to be able to see the costumes and see Bill's various, drafts of the script and all these other kind of really cool behind-the-scenes looks at how the film was put together. And
you have Gus's gun. Which
we do.
That's big, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge.
And is it a real gun or a replica from the time?
It is a replica.
Okay.
And I believe it was made in Italy, but it's pretty full-on replica where it's as heavy as the actual gun would be, and it's very difficult to handle.
So when he whacked that bartender, he whacked him good.
That was probably a prop gun. And I don't know about that, but I do know that, when Tommy Lee Jones was hacking away at the Army Scout with that branding iron.
Oh, my.
Well, we have that branding iron, and it's the softest piece of rubber you ever felt in your life.
That's a brutal scene, though. And out of all the movies I've seen, that is brutal. And then same thing with the bartender. That's I guess when I talk to people who've watched it a lot, those are the ones that stand out. And the most appreciated line, perhaps, in the whole thing is Call saying that I hate rude behavior in a man. Won't tolerate it. Now let's talk about another. If there's another much admired writer in Texas besides McMurtry, it's McCarthy. And he's also a writer of great westerns and modern westerns too, you might say. And you have all of his papers there too?
We do have all of Cormac McCarthy's papers here, yes. And
how did you get that? Did Bill intercede? Did he get them for you, so to speak?
Well, again, this is a really interesting way, and when you see how collections develop and they're built, and a lot of times it is through relationships that happen over a period of years. And now that we have Cormac McCarthy's literary papers, you can look in them and see that there were universities and private collectors, chasing him for decades, even before he became famous with All the Pretty Horses, No Country for Old Men, and The Road, and so forth. Bill Wittliff, I don't know if you talked with Bill about this, but Bill got to know Cormac when Bill was involved with the Sundance, the screenwriting part of the Sundance
no, we didn't talk about
Institute. And he saw a screenplay that Cormac had submitted back in the 1980s, and Bill said it wasn't a great screenplay because there was too much exposition, but it was incredible writing. And so he looked up Cormac, got to know him, and they became friends. And I think Bill talked to Cormac, and Cormac was on our mailing list, so he saw our publications, he saw our events, the books, how active we are at promoting Texas culture and so forth. And
now, was that
great writing.
Was that Blood Meridian that he saw?
The screenplay, I don't know exactly what the screenplay was, but it was right around the time Blood Meridian was written. But Cormac at that time had written, he'd been working for a while on a screenplay he was calling Cities of the Plain, which
yes.
became later the basis of that celebrated trilogy to begin with all the pretty horses. And so essentially what happened is that, Bill courted Cormac and just kept talking to him about the archive here. And, these, like I said, these things can sometimes play out over decades. And what I've found in my work here is that a lot of times when people reach a certain age, when people are younger, they're too busy producing really to worry so much about their legacy. When they reach a certain age, they start thinking about that sort of thing. And Cormac decided he was ready to go ahead and put his papers somewhere, and he called Bill and gave us a shot at it. So,
well, I heard that Blood Meridian there's actually a film of that, but it's hard to come by, or it isn't finished, or it's vague. Can you fill me in on that?
My understanding is, there are screenplays that have been done for Blood Meridian. No film has been made, and I've heard various rumors over the years, that Tommy Lee Jones was going to make it at one time, that James Franco, I think was a rumor I heard that he was working on a version. Now, Franco did make, as you probably know, Child of God, based on one of Cormac McCarthy's earlier Tennessee novels, which many people considered unfilmable.
And then Brando, I heard, was looking at Blood Meridian way back.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with that.
I mean, that's again just a rumor. I don't have much to go on, but I remember thinking, well, he would have been wonderful in that role of the satanic-like figure in Blood Meridian.
Oh, absolutely.
So, well, you have really, and can you get McMurtry's collection?
Well, McMurtry, he's such a interesting person, really one of the great writers ever to come out of Texas, or to come out of anywhere. Done books that will endure as classics. But the other thing about Larry, if you asked him to define himself, he would say, I'm a book collector first. And he sort of writes on the side.
Yes.
And so Larry, as a book collector, I think, has had a very interesting way of dealing with his archives over the years, and somebody who has loyalties to many different places. He and Bill Wittliff are friends going way back, and Larry has been very generous and donated wonderful things to this collection that we have here. At the same time, Larry has also placed other parts of his archives at other institutions. I think his alma mater, North Texas, has some.
Yes.
Rice University has a pretty good collection of his, I believe, and also U of H, and God knows where else. So his is really kind of
spread around.
Exactly.
Well, I know
people have different ways of thinking about that. Yeah.
I'm a graduate of North Texas. That's the first time I ever saw him speak in person. He came on a visit there to North Texas, and I know that he attended Rice, and I believe he taught there, right?
Student, right? Yeah, and he may have been a graduate student at the time when he was teaching, I think.
Yeah, because there was another author that I can't think of his name right now, but he has the McMurtry Chair at Rice, and he's writing a trilogy on vampires. I wish I could think of his name, but it's a fairly successful series. But it's interesting that he's in the McMurtry Chair and carrying on the tradition to some extent, although he's not writing Texas literature. Well, we only have a few minutes left, so you have McCarthy's collection, and I suppose that includes all of his writing notes and things of that nature.
Yes, and I'll say that with Cormac McCarthy, it's an unusual archive because he lived basically in poverty for a long time because he was such an uncompromising writer. And he would live in a cheap hotel and bang out these novels that a few people would recognize as masterpieces, but mostly went unread and unbought. And so there was a question of what he really was able to keep throughout the years. I remember when I first began working here, I heard rumors that his archive was kept in bus lockers in El Paso bus station, and he had to run down, put in a new quarter every day to make sure it stayed there.
Oh, what a great story!
Yeah, it's a great story. Probably absolutely not true, but probably not that far from the truth either. And so he did somehow manage to preserve a pretty good collection, and you see a lot of his research notes, his reading notes, and I think he said one time that books are made out of other books, and you can see, especially with Blood Meridian, you can track pretty well the other books that he consulted that he used to really inform his writing in Blood Meridian. And that's really true for his other books, too. We talked about J. Frank Dobie earlier, and you can see with his Border trilogy, especially The Crossing, he relied pretty heavily on J. Frank Dobie's work in that regard, because, Dobie was going into Mexico in the 1930s and, traveling around and meeting people, writing stories about it. And that's the kind of stuff McCarthy was mining later and reusing.
Well, that's one of the great things about reading Southwestern literature, because I've read a great deal of McMurtry, McCarthy too, Dobie, and you begin to see the influences from one to the other. They've also read all of each other and are, I would say, positively influenced. It's a nice synergy that works through that tradition.
Yeah, and when you think about what our literature is, and I think that's one of the reasons I really appreciate J. Frank Dobie's contribution, because he went out, I like to joke that reading and writing came pretty late to Texas for the most part. We were a frontier outpost. We were part of Mexico. We were part of the United States. And so we've been kind of overlooked in terms of culture, but Texas had a great oral tradition.
Yes.
For centuries.
Absolutely.
Mexican-American, Anglo-American, African-American. And those were the stories that, the people from the 1800s were dying out with those stories as we began modernizing in the 20th century. And that was J. Frank Dobie's great genius, to go out and start collecting those stories and getting them down on paper before they disappeared forever. And he recruited people like Jovita Gonzalez, who went to the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas and did the same thing. And J. Mason Brewer, the great African-American folklorist, who was doing that too. So, all these people preserved this stuff, and they were kind of our first writers in many respects too, but they preserved the stuff that made it possible for McMurtry and Cormac McCarthy to come back later and write these great bestsellers.
So right now, if anybody listening wants to come up there, your collection is open to everybody?
Absolutely.
Okay. No, you
got to be able to make it up the hill, but we have ways to do that.
Just get up the hill and you can see the Lonesome Dove collection. You can see some of McCarthy's works, and then the book from 1555 by
Cabeza de Vaca. We have a display of that book. We don't have that book out right now because
it's worth
we really need
$3 million or something, right?
Well, it is actually worth quite a lot, but it's more a matter of really preserving it. It's 500 years old, basically, so we can't expose it to a lot of light and all that sort of thing.
Well, thank you, Steve, so much for joining us today. We've been talking to Steve Davis, who is the curator of the Southwest Writers Collection at Texas State University, and it includes the Lonesome Dove collection, the film collection, so if you're ever up at San Marcos, you should drop in and see that collection for yourself. We want to thank audiobooks.com that underwrites Good Books Radio. I'm Dr. W.F. Strong. Here's hoping that all your books are good reads.